Welcome to the Philosophemes channel. In this episode, we ask the question, along with American philosopher Richard Rorty, what's the use of truth? I would characterize Rorty as a postmodern philosopher, and I would characterize this question as itself indicative and symptomatic of postmodernity. If you notice the word use in that question, you will see that Rorty is invoking utilitarianism, and we'll talk more about how that plays out in a moment here. But if you saw my seminar on postmodernism, then you already saw in some sense how utilitarianism characterizes this degeneration of the psyche. I realize that there are going to be some people who will absolutely be up in arms with me about that, but let's go ahead and take a look at the big picture and see what we think. All right, so first off, and this is all Rorty, by the way, this is all Rorty, the value of academic philosophy, according to Richard Rorty. Then we're going to ask this question, what is pragmatism? We're going to look at postmodernism, pragmatism, and nihilism. This idea of whatever, I do what I want. Did the modern period revise or redescribe morality? Who cares is what he says, and what's the use of truth? Then we're going to provide a critique of Rorty's postmodern pragmatism. And in order to do that, we're going to look at this. What is utility? What is Western philosophy's traditional contextualization of utility? And is a democratic theory of truth possible? The value of academic philosophy. According to Richard Rorty, quote, "There was indeed a time when I thought that analytic philosophy was the wave of the future, but now I think that it has run out of gas." Quote, "The analytic philosophy of recent decades appears to me rather rebarbative and pointless." End quote. What is pragmatism? So this is a quote by Rorty. I think it's important to make sure that we're on the same page and clear on this together. So the fundamental thesis of pragmatism is William James's assertion that if a debate has no practical significance, then it has no philosophical significance, right? So we're going to see that this is pragmatism to the wall. So my objection to the, quote, realism versus anti-realism, end quote, debate is not that the debaters are deploying sentences that are devoid of meaning, nor that they are using terms that do not designate substantial properties. Rather, it is that the resolution of these debates will have no bearing on practice. I view debates of this sort as examples of sterile scholasticism. I regret that such a large part of English language philosophy in the 20th century was devoted to questions of this type. Now, I want to say two things about this quickly, is that on the one hand, I think that what Rorty would really like to see academic philosophy become is exactly what it has become, which is just politics. On the other hand, this idea of scholasticism, that it is simply another example of scholastic debates, right? This idea that how many angels, for example, can dance on the head of a pin. Now, I've said that in certain contexts. In fact, I was criticized and attacked by a Catholic priest who I've been thinking, and I've been interested in responding to him in some fashion, but it's just not really high on my priority list. But yeah, so someone heard me say that, that I think that analytic philosophy, basically quoting Rorty, even though it's not in this context, that analytic philosophy is essentially scholasticism all over again. And they went out and contacted their priest. And so then their priest wrote a peer-reviewed article, peer-reviewed article criticizing me. Anyway, I thought that was really funny. One of analytic philosophy's own says it, and they think it's great. the American Philosophical Association really wants to highlight it, but if I say it, then we got to go find our priests and rabbis and have them attack me. That's great. Okay, so that's what Rorty means by pragmatism. So let's take a look now at another quote by Rorty from this essay, What's the Use of Truth? And here we're going to see it in relation to postmodernism and nihilism. So, quote, I'm quoting Rorty again, of course, for the postmodern philosophers and the pragmatists, the traditional questions of metaphysics and epistemology can be neglected because they have no social utility. So here is Rorty, of course, embracing being a postmodern philosopher. It is not that they are devoid of meaning, right? Because he doesn't want to get into the metaphysics of any of this, right? He doesn't want to do the ontology. He doesn't want to do ontology. He wants to do politics. It is not that they are devoid of meaning, nor that they rest on false premises. It is simply that the vocabulary of metaphysics and epistemology is of no practical use. So, I like when we talked about postmodernism, this phrase, whatever, I do what I want. Here's another quote from Rorty, and I find that this one really just hits the nail right in the head. It's especially telling. So here we go. Consider an analogy. When Kant and other Enlightenment thinkers detached moral obligations from divine commands, they, wait for it, this is a joke ultimately, they did not think that they were revising our moral concepts, but that they were redescribing them more clearly. They were helping us to clarify our conception of morality. The enemies of the Enlightenment attacked this claim, accusing these thinkers of revising morality. Well, which is it? Is it a redescription or a revision? Did Kant clarify our moral vocabulary, or did he revise it? My feeling is that it is not worth the trouble to try to answer that question. The change Kant suggested has contributed to the evolution of our moral discourse. The only question that we need to ask ourselves is this: was this change socially useful or not? End quote. So, who cares? Rorty says, our responsibilities are exclusively toward other human beings, not toward reality. Notice the postmodernity here, right? I think, fascinatingly enough, though, from other points of view, postmodern philosophers can't agree on what a human being is, right? In fact, I'm putting together a presentation on this as well. I talk about this in my Existentialism 2-volume set, among other places, but I believe that it truly is a Marxist position to not accept, to not accept the idea that the term human actually refers to anything absolutely, right? That human is a relative term. And once you've accepted that, which I take to be a Marxist position, once you accept that, I'll back that claim up later in a video on its own, and probably in regard to post-humanism and transhumanism. But anyway, once you accept that, then you're already way down the road. So you're wide open to advocating genocide. That's what you're wide open for and wide open to. Again, our responsibilities are exclusively toward other human beings, not toward reality. So says this postmodern philosopher, Richard Rorty, American philosopher, Richard Rorty. Here's another quote. He says, in conclusion, I would remark that since Plato, the meanings of normative terms like good, just, and true have been problems only for philosophers. Everybody else knows how to use them, those terms, and does not need an explanation of what they mean. Good, just, and true. We don't need an explanation of justice. I am perfectly ready to admit that one cannot identify the concept of truth with the concept of justification or with any other. But that is not a sufficient reason to conclude that the nature of truth is an important or interesting question. Whenever you see these analytic philosophers talking about goodness, justice, and truth as though it is a normative term, I think the game's already over. These are transcendentals. They're not normative terms. All right, so here's a critique of Rorty's postmodern pragmatism and the democratic theory of truth. So what is utility? What is Western philosophy's traditional contextualization of utility? And is a democratic theory of truth possible? And again, forgive me for stating it again, but I just want to say that I know that there's some people who are not going to be happy about this. We can hash it out somewhere else. Okay, so, quote, for the pragmatist, this is Rorty again, for the pragmatist, knowledge is, like truth, simply a complement paid to the beliefs which we think so well justified that, for the moment, further justification is not needed. So knowledge and truth, those are just complements. An inquiry into the nature of knowledge can, on this view, only be a socio-historical account of how various people have tried to reach agreement on what to believe. An inquiry into the nature of knowledge can, on this view, only be a socio-historical account of how various people have tried to reach agreement on what to believe. So, what is utility? The state of being useful, profitable, or beneficial. Satisfaction or pleasure as opposed to pain, right? Utilitarianism, a kind of conduct ethics. Utilitarianism emphasizes ends over means, often called consequentialist because it privileges consequences over duties and virtues. I know there are some people who will disagree with that characterization, but I consider that to be the canonical characterization. Okay, so Western philosophy's traditional contextualization of utility, and I've mentioned this to some people who are just really diehard utilitarians, and I feel as though they just didn't recognize the value of this. So let's see if we can make sense of it for them here. So postmodernism in terms of Plato's forms of love, this comes from the seminar on postmodernism. So in terms of philosophers, or in terms of the category of philosophers, we see virtue. In terms of the category of guardians, we see duty. And in terms of the category of moneymakers, this is Plato. So in terms of moneymakers, we see utility. In terms of Aristotle, this could be the pleasure seekers. You could also re-articulate this platonically in terms of avarice, or the lovers of gain, right? So the philosophers are the lovers of wisdom, and they love virtue. The guardians are the lovers of honor, and they love duty. And the moneymakers are the lovers of gain, and they love utility. All right, so you can see that Rorty's postmodern pragmatism is perfectly in line with Western philosophy's traditional characterization of postmodernism. Rorty's determination of the meaning of the good is in terms of pleasure-seeking, that is, money-making, and the love of or the desire for gain above all else. We already saw that good is just a normative term. But once we start asking, even if we're going to ask something like, well, let's vote on the meaning of the word good, right? Once you ask something like that, or once you say, well, we're going to understand the good only in terms of how it benefits humans. I'm quoting Rorty here, right? When you approach the good in that way, you inevitably end up having to choose between one of these characterizations of the good. And the reason that you have to choose between one of these characterizations of the good is because it's not possible to socially implement these multiple understandings of the good. I think that in theory, they are not mutually exclusive, but in terms of the practical implication or policy implementation, we have to have already settled on one understanding of the good out of these three ontological categories. So some of the best characterizations of this form of the good, this understanding of goodness, has been formulated by quote unquote gangster rappers, right? So just so we're all on the same page. And I'm not disparaging gangster rappers here, right? I'm just saying that this is the company that Rorty is keeping here, right? Is that, I think that many of the wonderful tunes put out by Snoop Dogg, for example, could be characterized as falling into a category of determining the meaning of the good in terms of utility. So it's an interesting question. I understand that there are some philosophy professors who say that if you are white, does that include Italians? I think so. But that if you are white, that you're not allowed to think about rap music, or because you can't really appreciate rap music, your white privilege keeps you from appreciating rap music. I feel like these philosophy professors have never played sports, right? So they've never been on a football team. They've never been on a basketball team. Anyway, so we're just making the point here. I'm not drawing any conclusions in regard to it, that Rorty's determination of the meaning of the good is in line with figures like Snoop Dogg and so forth. We'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so I think that this traditional contextualization of utility is very important. And the fact that some people want to ignore this suggests to me that perhaps they can't see the pattern, or if they can see the pattern, they haven't experienced the value of applying the pattern throughout the history of philosophy. So for me, this is the correct way to contextualize utility. All right. And so, of course, we saw Rorty already talking about social utility. So when you ask the question, well, what is the social good? What is the value of anything philosophical for Rorty? Or, he talks about something having practical value. It has to have social utility to have practical value. Well, we see it's already at the exclusion of understandings of the good, such as virtue and duty. And that's Plato, right? That's Plato. So lastly here, in terms of a critique of Rorty's postmodern pragmatism and the democratic theory of truth. So is a democratic theory of truth possible? So the answer that we have here is no. And so then we follow up with the question, why? Because truth cannot be trumped by feelings. Truth cannot be trumped by feelings. I'm putting together a series of presentations on simulation theory. All of this stuff is taking so long to do because I'm working on this other massive writing project in the background. But in this series, there is this deep sense in which the idea of a participation trophy, the implications of the idea of a participation trophy are immense, but the idea of a participation trophy is an advocacy or advocating for a kind of simulation, not pretending, but simulating. We're not going to give away a trophy to the winner. Instead, we're going to give away trophies to everyone. Well, what is the good of giving trophies away to everyone? Well, the good of giving trophies away to everyone is that then everyone gets to experience being a winner. Well, what do you mean everyone gets to experience being a winner? There is no winner if everybody gets a trophy. Well, then you say, still though, that experience, that feeling of getting that trophy, right? Well, then what they're really saying when they say that is that you are simulating the experience of being a winner. Not pretending, but simulating. It's a very important distinction. And so when you acknowledge and when you realize that you are simulating the experience of being a winner, the philosophy of participation trophies is a kind of simulation. Much follows from there, right? Because you can extrapolate that and you can understand that there are various things going on in politics. There are various things going on in society today that are directly analogous to participation trophies. And that is, in a sense, why it's the case that you could, or one of the ways in which you could argue that we are in a kind of social simulation. And that's thoroughly postmodern. So here again, truth cannot be trumped by feelings. So even if everyone feels as though they are the winner, that doesn't mean that they are the winner. And yes, I understand you can say, oh, it's very capitalistic of me to be so preoccupied with winning, but we don't have to understand winning in terms of utility either. Can you imagine if a judge were to rule a defendant not guilty simply because of the color of their skin, regardless of the evidence against them? Now, let's keep going. Wait to the end. Can you imagine if the government were to deny the truth of math and determine that one social group's money has more value than another group's? In this way, the redistribution of wealth may be understood as grounded in a postmodern theory of truth. Popular vote cannot determine reality. If it could, then we could end homelessness and starvation in the next 5 minutes. Let's go back up to the first one. So, can you imagine if a judge were to rule a defendant not guilty simply because of the color of their skin, regardless of the evidence against them? Now, I feel like when you hear me read that, you may be thinking to yourself, well, of course that happens, right? Isn't that what happens with white people all the time, right? Isn't that white privilege? Well, now, wait a minute. There can't be such a thing as white privilege if there isn't such a thing as truth. Think through this with me. It is not possible for you to say that the white person is guilty, but they were determined to be not guilty because of their white privilege. Because if you're in this postmodern space in which what really matters is feelings, what's the use of truth? If you can't say that someone is guilty or that someone is not guilty, if there is no truth in regard to that, right, then it's not possible for you to argue in the other direction, which is that some person was determined not guilty because of their white privilege when they should have been determined guilty. If you're going to claim that they should have been determined guilty, then you have to adhere to some version of truth, right? Now, if you want, I mean, we could go relativism to the ground, right? You could say something like, well, we're going to stick with utility, and we're going to say that they're guilty because it's socially useful for us to say that they're guilty. Well, that's just war. I mean, that's you're absolutely doing exactly what you don't want the other side to be doing, or you're absolutely doing exactly what you claim the other side is doing, even though hopefully it's the case that neither side is trying to do that. But it's a thoroughly racist policy in which you're saying, well, it's socially useful for us to say that you're guilty because you're white. And of course, I mean, when we're in this postmodern sphere where isness is called into question, is this that, is that this? I mean, when we can call all of these things into question, I think that suddenly it becomes possible to respond to that. I think that ultimately that's a form of violence. I mean, what else can you do other than respond with violence? But ultimately, I think you can call into question, well, what is whiteness then, right? Suddenly, whiteness becomes whatever it is socially useful to call white. This is thoroughly postmodern. It is thoroughly relativistic. But the question then becomes, what is it relative to? And in truth, it's relative to power. It is a kind of weaponization of democracy. Even this has been called into question. People are asking whether or not votes have been manipulated in some way. So even in a postmodern context where we're not even sure what the majority might think, it certainly feels as though we know how the majority think. There is a sense in which this idea of social utility just reduces down to power. It's power over truth. So we want to say something like, well, truth is just a kind of compliment that we pay to something. We're going to implement policies that we deem to be socially useful, and we think that your white privilege gets in the way of social utility, and so therefore we're going to enact policies against your white privilege. And you say, well, what is white privilege? What is whiteness? What is white privilege? We say, well, first off, we don't even need to define what white privilege is. We just need to be able to use that in a socially useful way, that term in a socially useful way. But really, it's kind of whatever we want it to be, isn't it? And then if you claim that you don't know, or you want an answer as to what it is, well, we'll just say that that's because you're so privileged with your whiteness that you can't understand it. That's just a pure power move. Again, what's the use of truth, right? I think for Rorty, what he really wants is social utility, and that's the only truth and goodness of any value for him. So this was part of the postmodern philosophy presentation. And if you have comments or questions, I will try to get to them as quickly as possible. I would like to hear what you have to say. I mean, I'm trying to approach this in a reasonable and professional manner. I'm not interested in some sort of hostility. I'm not interested in being hostile toward anyone here. I don't advocate for any kind of genocide. So maybe they'll make me the president of a university sometime soon. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you.